Okay. All right. Hello, everybody. Welcome to the inaugural event of BAAL's Research Synthesis and Applied Linguistics SIG. My name is Sin Wang Chong. I will be hosting the event together with my committee members. Welcome to the event. Before we start, I would like to reiterate that the event will be video recorded. And so please make sure if you do not want your face to be recorded, please turn off your camera now. In terms of the chat, the content, the information in the chat will not be recorded, and the Q&A session will not be recorded. So I would like to share my screen, and I would like to just give you an overview of the SIG and the rundown for today before we have our first speaker. Okay. Can everybody see my first slide?
Yes.
Thank you very much. All right, so I would like to briefly talk about today's
Hello,
You've
Sinwang,
muted
you're
yourself,
on mute.
Sinwang.
Sorry about that. Am I back?
Yes.
Hello? Okay,
Yes.
sorry about that. Right, so what I would like to do is to give you an overview of today's event, and then I will give you a brief introduction of our SIG and the activities that we plan to do. So for the first 30 minutes, I will be introducing the SIG, as I said, and I will also, you also have the chance to see our committee members, and they will be introducing themselves and their roles on the committee, and then we will have our first plenary speaker, Dr. Hamish Chalmers from the University of Oxford, and afterwards we'll have a 15-minute break. And then we'll have Dr. Luke Plonsky from Northern Arizona University to give his the second plenary. All right. So just some background information about our SIG and about the inaugural event. And I think it's I'm very pleased to share the kind of interest that we have gathered in the past few months. So in total, I'm very happy to report that we have a total of 289 colleagues who have signed up to become a SIG member. So I think it's a pretty encouraging number for a new SIG which was established just a few months ago. And for this particular event, a total of 174 people registered for this inaugural event. I've received a number of emails saying that they may not be able to attend the live event because they are in different time zones, but they will be very happy to watch the recording later. And you can see from this word cloud that the participants are from different parts of the world, really. So we have colleagues based in UK universities. You will also see the University of Tasmania. So we have colleagues from Australia. We have colleagues from Hong Kong, from China. We have colleagues from Japan, and we have colleagues from Thailand. So there are a fairly good representation of people in different parts of the world. So I'm very, very pleased to see this. So just a little bit about the SIG. So our SIG is called Research Synthesis in Applied Linguistics. It's a SIG that focuses on the methodological practices and values of research synthesis in applied linguistics and in language education. And we would like to do that by organizing events, workshops, or other activities to discuss and to advance methodological traditions and issues of conducting different types of research synthesis. And having in mind that research synthesis, it's not a specific research type in applied linguistics, is actually quite widely practiced in other disciplines as well, for example, in medicine and healthcare. So one of our goals is to facilitate interdisciplinary dialogues with specialists in this area who are working in different disciplines. So now I would like to introduce our SIG committee, and I would invite each of the committee member to briefly introduce themselves, their roles, and why they are interested in taking on this role. So my name, as I said at the beginning, I'm Sin Wang. I'm currently based at the University of Edinburgh, and I am the SIG convener of this SIG. So I created a proposal for a SIG focusing on research synthesis simply because I'm very, very interested in this type of desk-based research, not only because it's potentially very, very relevant to practitioners, to teachers, but it's also something I think it's overlooked in applied linguistics. So I think it's very important for us to have a community to raise awareness and to discuss methodological practices. And I think one of the things that I'm very interested in addition to the methodology, is the value of research syntheses. So a lot of the times we think about research syntheses, we think about how useful they are for researchers to talk about or to discuss the state of the art, to talk about future research directions. But equally important, I think research syntheses are quite useful to teachers, to policymakers, because a synthesis summarizes quite a lot of articles on a specific topic, and it makes research findings more accessible to communities beyond academia. So I think, and especially given the recent open science, open scholarship movement, I think research synthesis has a role to play in terms of opening the door to make research findings more accessible to people outside of universities. So I will hand over to Aurora, who is our secretary. And I should note that for Aurora and for Mehdi, because of their internet connection. For Aurora, she will not be able to show her face, but she'll be able to introduce herself. For Mehdi, Mehdi is here. Mehdi is based in Iran. So as some of you may know, Iran is experiencing some internet issue. So Mehdi is here, but he has recorded a self-introduction, which I will play later on, just to make sure that the introduction is smooth. So Aurora, I will hand it over to you. Thank you.
All right, can everyone hear me?
Yep.
Great, thank you very much, Xinwang. And good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to our event. I'm Aurora, the Secretary of BAAL Research Synthesis in Applied Linguistics SIG, and I'm currently a PhD student at the University of Cambridge. And my research interests lie in heritage language learning and immigrant sociolinguistics, psychological development, and multilingualism. In my spare time, I'm into violin and multiple languages. Thank you very much for joining us in this event, and I really hope you can enjoy. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Aurora. Ping Ping.
Yes. Hello, everyone. My name is Ping Ping. I am currently studying at Queen's University Belfast, and I'm in my fourth year PhD. Hopefully, this will be my final year. My PhD looks at translanguaging practices on social media, especially in the Chinese WeChat use. Um, I am the chair of the SIG, and this is quite new role to me as well. I am quite looking forward to welcoming you to our future events. That'll be me. Thanks very much. And Xinwang, do you want to play Maddie's recording or?
Yes, yes, I will have to share again because I have to make sure I turn on the computer sound. So I will share my screen again.
Hello, everybody, and thank you all for being here today. My name is Mehdi Shahdadi, and I am from Iran. If you're seeing this video clip, it means that I still do not have access to reliable and stable internet connection. And I was given this chance to introduce myself and to welcome you all and say hello to you. I am the event organizer of Research Synthesis in Applied Linguistics SIG, and I am also a practitioner member of TESOL Graphics. And I am, in terms of my educational background, I am a master's holder in the field of ELT, and I've been involved in this field practically for more than a decade. In terms of teaching, I'm interested in ICT integrated teaching and learning. And in terms of research, I am interested in learner self-regulated learning strategies, their metacognition, and also feedback literacy. I hope you enjoy the day, and I'm very sure it is a very useful and enjoyable event. Thank you all again, and good luck.
All right. Good. And then, Chi, do you want to introduce yourself briefly?
Yeah, hello everyone. I'm Chi. Now I'm a master student at Queen's University Belfast, and I'm going to graduate this December. Well, now I'm the website editor in Research Synthesis in Applied Linguistics Special Interest Group of BAAL. And I'm quite interested in research synthesis, and my dissertation is a qualitative research synthesis on bilingual education in China. And there is a work that I worked with Xinguang about research synthesis, which will be published in an SSCI indexed journal. Well, and also there are some other research synthesis projects in progress now. Additionally, I'm also planning to do a PhD. Well, I feel like I'm pretty honored that I can work with so many brilliant colleagues, and I feel pretty glad that I can meet all of you here. I hope this is going to be a successful and a wonderful event. Thank you.
Thank you very much, everybody. As you can see, everybody, that our team is very young, myself included. So I'm sure it will be a very vibrant community. And I think one of the joys of working in a methodological SIG is you get to meet with people from different substantive areas. So you see people from bilingualism, people from corpus linguistics, people from different fields working together. So I think that's one of the perks of being in a methodological SIG. And I think you also see that we have not only researchers or research students in our SIG, we also have practitioners. So I think this is something, to me at least, quite important, because as I mentioned earlier, I think research synthesis really has a role to play in bridging the research practice divide. So this is our SIG committee. And I would like to then say something about the SIG website. So as she just mentioned, she is the website editor of our SIG website. So she has developed a SIG website from scratch, and I think she has done a very, very good job. So you can see a QR code on the top right-hand corner of this slide. So if you're interested, you can go to the website and have a look. I'm not going to show you the website now because I want to reserve more time for our speakers, but I just want to give you an overview of the website. So on the website, you will find information about the remit of the SIG and the objectives and the aims of the SIG. You'll find information about SIG committee members, and we have our contact info there as well. So if you would like to contact us, maybe you would like to organize an event together with us, please reach out. Or if you have any questions about the SIG or any suggestions, we would love to hear from you. And also we have a repository of publications focusing on secondary research. So we have some of the latest publications, not only in applied linguistics, but also in language education as well. And the repository will keep growing, as new publications come out. Another tab that you will see on the website is methodological guidelines. So we have put together some links, some resources on how to conduct research syntheses, different types of research syntheses. A lot of the guidelines are from applied linguistics, language education, but there are guidelines from other fields as well. As I said, there are other disciplines that practice research synthesis. They may not call it research syntheses, but it's basically a systematic approach to conducting literature review. So you may want to have a look at some of the resources there. And there is also another tab on related projects, and Mehdi mentioned Graphics, which is a knowledge exchange project, really, concerning the production and creation of infographics based on secondary research. So it's related to research synthesis, but it's more towards the practitioners. And then we have a tab on events. So if you want to check out our latest events, you can go to that page and you will see details about future events. And something that is under development is a repository of syntheses. So this is something I would like to say a few words on. So what we try to do is later on we'll try to compile a list of researchers who have conducted or maybe published research syntheses in applied linguistics and language education, and we would like to upload their information on, for example, an Excel sheet where people can see publicly, because you know, conducting a research synthesis is it's a lot of work, and usually you need a team of people to make it work and, you know, make it a piece of quality work, I should say. So sometimes people may be looking for experienced researchers who have worked in this area. So what we want to do is put together a list of people who have done syntheses before, their contact information, their institution, and their publications, so that they know the areas that they have worked on before and the types of syntheses that they have done before, and they can reach out to the colleagues, and they may, you know, collaborate in the future. So this is something we would like to do at a later stage. Another thing I would like to introduce is our SIG newsletter. So it's not a physical newsletter, of course, it's sent via email. If you have signed up to be our members, you should have received one at the beginning of October. If you joined us after the beginning of October, you will receive one in the beginning of November. So every month we send out newsletter. Mostly it's announcements related to events, workshops related to research syntheses. It may be events organized by our SIG. It may be events organized by other societies, other associations. And also we'll have new research syntheses included in our newsletter. So for example, in October, there are a number of new syntheses published, and we would like to draw your attention to those syntheses. So the reason I'm sharing this with you is twofold. Number one, it's to keep you up to date to the latest development of research syntheses. At the same time, if you have any resources, or maybe you're organizing an event, or maybe you are working on a project on research synthesis and you would like us to help promote the event or the resource, please email us, and then we will include it in our email newsletter. And also just a little bit of promotion there that, you know, along the line of work that the SIG is doing, we will have a special issue to be published very soon, hopefully early next year, if not later, on precisely the topic, research synthesis in applied linguistics, and we're going to publish it in Applied Linguistics Review. And so Hamish here is one of the co-editors, and Luke is one of the contributors in a special issue. So we're putting together the final list of publications. We're doing the last round of review, and hopefully we'll be able to publish the whole issue early next week. And something that I'm quite pleased to see in this special issue is the diversity of the types of research synthesis. So in addition to meta-analysis, which is, of course, more people will be familiar with it in applied linguistics, we also have different types, other types of research synthesis, including qualitative synthesis of research, bibliometric review, etc. So we'll be definitely promoting this special issue when it is published. Last but not least, this is my final slide. Of course, it's to lure you into being part of our family. So if you're thinking about becoming a SIG member, it's very, very simple. You just go to our website and you will see a become a member link. So you just click and complete the form. It's completely free of charge, no hidden cost. And so it's completely free of charge. And you do not need to be a member of BAAL to become a SIG member. However, I would strongly encourage you to become a BAAL member, partly because I'm on the executive committee of BAAL, and also mainly because I really think that there are a lot of activities organized by BAAL that you may find interesting and relevant. And just for your information, for future SIG events, if you are not a BAAL member, then you have to pay a fee to participate in future SIG events. You don't need to pay anything to become a member, but for SIG events, you have to pay a fee. But for the inaugural event, I would like to make it open to everybody, because this is us saying hello to everybody here. So if you want more information about BAAL and about the benefits of being a member, please go to BAAL's website. Or if you have any questions, please email me. And I know Alex is here. Alex is also on the executive committee. So you can email us if you have any questions about joining BAAL. All right, so I am going to stop sharing my screen because I don't want to take up too much time. I will now hand it over to Aurora and Chi to introduce our first speaker. Is it? Are you going to?
Yeah.
Okay.
So now let me introduce our first speaker, Hamish. Is the lecturer in Applied Linguistics and Second Language Acquisition in the Department of Education at the University of Oxford. His research interest centers on evaluation of pedagogical approaches to teaching children who use English as an additional language. In particular, his research focuses on the use of the first language as a pedagogical tool for multilingual learners in English medium classrooms. His methodological interest is in randomized trials, systematic reviews, and co-creation of research with practitioners. He was a primary school teacher for the best part of 2 decades in both UK state schools and overseas in the international school sector. He is the vice chair of NALDIC, the UK Subject Association for EAL, and the director of IDISA, an organization that curriculate information about systematic review in education and publishes prospective registrations for planned and ongoing systematic reviews. So now let me introduce our first speaker's Hamish's topic. The topic is methodological and reporting rigor of systematic reviews and meta-analysis in language education, findings from the international databases of education systematic reviews. So in the following presentation, how the collection of systematic reviews was assembled and how the methodological and the quality of those reviews was assessed, as well as what the findings showed the state of the art in this field, will be presented. So now let me hand this over to Hamish. Thank you.
Thank you, Chi, very much. And thank you, Sin Wang and the rest of the organising committee for putting together this fabulous event and the fabulous SIG as well. I think it's a really brilliant contribution to the field, and I'm delighted to be part of it, delighted to be here at the inaugural event. So let me just get my slides up so that you can see them, and then I'll kick off. Right. Okay, you can see those, I hope.
Yep.
Good stuff. Okay, let me just say another way these things work. Everything starts to flip around. Right, okay, good stuff. Okay, so yes, I'm here to talk about methodological and reporting rigor of systematic reviews and meta-analyses in language education. And this is based on the findings of an initiative that I set up with colleagues at the University of Oxford to provide a database of systematic reviews in education and a place to publish prospectively the protocols for planned and ongoing systematic reviews in education. We call it IDESA for short. But I want to start by going back 2,500 years or so to this chap here, Hippocrates, who gives us a lesson, I think, about the importance of systematic reviews. And he says, "Full discovery will be made if the inquirer be competent, conduct his researches with knowledge of the discoveries already made, and make them his starting point. But anyone who, casting aside and rejecting all these means, attempts to conduct research in any other way or after any other fashion, and asserts that he has found out anything, is and has been the victim of deception." Hippocrates was drawing our attention to the importance of basing knowledge or the way that we move forward with knowledge on what we already know. If we fast forward another 2,000 years or so, we could perhaps be a little bit more pithy about it and put it this way: new primary research should be justified by what is already known. Why? Well, if we don't take into account what's already known, then we risk making some mistakes and falling into some traps. And some of those traps can be quite deadly. Others of them are not so deadly. But I'll try to give you an example of what I mean by this. One, you've heard the term "one swallow does not a summer make." Just in the same way, one study does not a conclusion falsify, or a theory falsify, should I say. So here is a forest plot of a study that was done, or a systematic review and meta-analysis that was done on the relative effects of a treatment. This is from the healthcare field, a treatment for heart attacks versus placebo. And what you can see here quite clearly is that the results of individual studies tend to vary quite a lot. If you're not familiar with forest plots, then just a very quick sort of tutorial. What we have on a forest plot is a point estimate, which gives us the estimate of the effect compared to the comparison, and then a confidence interval, which is that horizontal line which goes across. If the point estimate in this case is to the left of what we call the line of no difference in the middle here, we can say that the treatment has been shown to be more effective than the control. In this case, for all of these studies, it was a placebo control. And if the point estimate lands on the right of that line of no difference, then we can say that it favors the control over treatment. The confidence interval tells us how confident we can be that that point estimate is accurate. And so theoretically, this point estimate here for the second study in this meta-analysis is thought to be here, but might be as far across as to the left as nearly 0.1 of an effect, or it might be as far over to the right as, 0.2. And therefore this point estimate may actually suggest that the control is more effective than the treatment. And so what you can see here is that studies tend to produce different results. They, if you will, wobble around. And so it's not good enough just to accept the results of one study on its own when more than one study is available to consult. And so we should put them together and try and increase our understanding, increase the statistical power in this case of the studies, so we can come to an understanding of the effects of a treatment in this case, or let's say in education, a teaching approach or something else, by looking at everything together. And so what this meta-analysis does is it sums up at the bottom here the cumulative evidence of all of these studies together. And we can see here that we've got a small to moderate effect here in favor of the treatment. So that's why we need to take one of the reasons why we need to take into account what we already know. Now, if I just to prove that I am in the true spirit of this SIG, an interdisciplinary kind of person, here's something from applied linguistics. Another set is slightly differently set out because this has been set out in order of from negative to positive. But this is looking at oral language proficiency in the first language and how that correlates with oral language proficiency in the second language. And we can see here that we get a variety of different findings, some of which suggest that there is a slightly negative correlation and some which are a relatively positive correlation. When we put them all together, then we end up with this estimate of the overall findings of this meta-regression, showing that there is a positive correlation, again, a small to moderate positive correlation between oral first language and oral second language. So that's one reason why we should take into account what we already know. Another reason is that when we have not taken into account what's already known, our new primary research risks wasting time, effort, and resources and can cause unintended harms. What do I mean by that? Well, I'm looking at waste and harms here. So here again is the original forest plot that I showed you, but this has been constructed slightly differently. Instead of presenting the results of individual studies and then doing the meta-analysis at the end to show the cumulative effect, each of these points on the forest plot takes into account what goes before it. So we start with, let's start here because you can see the full extent of the confidence interval. This study here done in 1969 took into this is the results of the study that was done in 1963 and 1959 together. Then the next one down here, the study in 1971, takes into account the study in 1969, 1963, and 1959, and so on and so forth as you go down. So what we're seeing here is over the course of time, as you go down the forest plot, the evidence for the effectiveness of this treatment getting more and more robust as we add in the new studies as they emerge. And so until we get down to the bottom where we have a point estimate which is firmly on the side of the treatment side of this graph and a very small confidence interval based on 36,974 participants. So why am I talking about waste and harms? Well, waste, what we end up here, what we find here is that we could probably be quite confident in the effects of this drug if we took into consideration all of the studies done between 1959 and 1973. We've got a point estimate on the favors control side, and we've got a confidence interval that doesn't cross the line of no difference. Okay, so then we get a couple of others added into the mix, and we see that the point estimate moves a little bit more towards the line of no difference, and the confidence intervals tend to sort of shuffle in that direction as well. So maybe we would want to have a look at that point there. That's 1977, where we've got the cumulative evidence tells us that actually we can be pretty confident now that this treatment works better than placebo. However, people continue to do research after 1977, right up to 1988, so another 11 years of studies, essentially addressing a question for which we already know the answer. That seems like a waste of time, effort, and resources to me, because there are other things that these researchers could be doing with their time, their money, their resources, and their effort, had they taken into consideration what was already known and done so in a way which considers the totality of the evidence. But they didn't. They carried on going, and like you say, until 1988, when this meta-analysis was done, the studies of this treatment continued. So that's waste. Now, harms. What you have to consider here is 36,974 people, nearly 37,000 people have been included in trials of this treatment. Remember, it's a trial of a medicine against a placebo. That means these are all randomized trials. That means that half of that 37,000 people were entered into this trial and on the basis of chance were either given a treatment for which we knew the effects in 1977 or a control, a placebo. We already knew that the placebo was less effective than the treatment in 1977, yet for 11 more years, thousands of people were unnecessarily put in harm's way by being given a treatment which didn't work for which we already knew the answer, or being denied a treatment for which we already knew was effective. So I think these are important things for researchers to be aware of, and why systematic reviewing is so important. And I'll get onto that in a moment, because not taking into account the findings of previous applied linguistics research is rarely fatal, but it can be wasteful. I've already talked about the unnecessary duplication of effort. So, where we could be doing new research which addresses issues that we don't have robust answers for, we're repeating ourselves. There are opportunity costs. If you're busy doing work on doing primary research on something for which an answer is already known, or at least conceivably could be known, then you could be using your time, your efforts, your your resources more appropriately to do something else. And it's wasting your money. I'm not talking about my money, I'm talking about your money. You will pay tax. Your taxes go into the government coffers, which fund most, in this country at least, most of the social sciences research through things like the ESRC, UKRI, the Education Endowment Foundation, and so on and so forth. So this is people doing research on the basis of not knowing what the evidence is. So this can be wasteful. And it may be harmful. I mean, if not necessarily fatal, it can be harmful, and this might be in two ways of these unintended harms: exposing learners, and this is in my particular field as education, exposing learners to ineffective teaching or basing practice on selective interpretations of the evidence, which again may result in opportunity costs to the children or to the learners that we're talking about by not giving them effective interventions for their learning or engaging in effective practice. So again, it's not as dramatic as it is in medicine, but I think it's very important nonetheless. And here's an example here. So we've got all of these studies. It's the same forest plot that I showed you earlier. But taking a look at this, one wonders whether bilingualism researchers could be making better use of their time and their effort and their resources, finding out something new rather than relitigating old questions for which we seem to have a fairly robust answer already. So if looking at the totality of the available evidence protects us of this kinds of harms and this kind of waste, then how should we be doing that? And my answer is through systematic reviews. I want to pause here quickly to talk about the definition of terms. We, and by that I mean my colleagues and I at IDESA, but I think more generally, I hope more generally in the field, we use the term systematic review as an umbrella term. The key features of a systematic review or systematic research syntheses are quite simple, that they are explicit and transparent methods that are used. It's a piece of research following a standard set of stages, and importantly, it's accountable, it's replicable, and it's updatable. So that's what I mean when I talk about systematic reviews. There are the earlier systematic reviews, particularly the ones in healthcare, were tended to focus on the statistical synthesis of randomized trials using meta-analyses. And I would also pause here just to draw attention to the fact that systematic review and meta-analysis are not synonymous. Meta-analysis is a statistical technique and are often parts of systematic reviews, but the two things are not identical. We've seen developments in the evidence synthesis field that have added new types of review. And so I've given some examples there, but I know that Luke's going to go into more detail about these later, so I won't go into any particular detail on this. But as an indication, we have configurative reviews, which has been bringing together, perhaps theory to have a look at what's, to configure evidence about theory, not necessarily to provide an estimate of effect on a treatment or a learning intervention, for example. Aggregative reviews are more like the sort of evidence syntheses used in healthcare, adding up a whole load of studies to try to come to an answer based on all of the available evidence. We have scoping reviews to sort of find out what's been done in a field, rapid reviews to very quickly try and get a feel for what's what we know in a field, realist syntheses, gap maps, methodological syntheses, document analyses, and so on. There's a typology in Grant and Booth in 2009, but that's already quite dated. And in fact, as a sort of as a bit of a warning, recently, I think it was this year, published an article about the Pandora's box of different types of research syntheses. Are we opening up this box to trying to define various different types, and are we going to confuse ourselves, various different types of research syntheses? So for the purposes of this session and my thinking around this, I like to use the term systematic reviews to be an umbrella for all of those different types of research syntheses. We can define them like Ben Goldacre does here as on an ideological point. He's saying, instead of just mooching through the research literature, consciously or unconsciously picking out papers here and there that support our pre-existing beliefs, we take a scientific, systematic approach to the very process of looking for scientific evidence, ensuring that our evidence is as complete and as representative as possible of all the research that's ever been done. More recently, Goff and colleagues write that evidence synthesis uses formal, explicit, rigorous methods to bring together the findings of studies already completed and to provide an account of the totality of what is known from that pre-existing research. Evidence synthesis clarifies what is known and not known about a research question. It uses research methods to provide a statement about an evidence base and is therefore a crucial step in the use of research findings in personal and public decision making. I wanted to just reinforce that message that we're talking about a high quality, rigorous approach to finding out what we already know so that this can inform what we do next. Because that will reappear in my talk in terms of the quality of reporting of systematic reviews later on. So let's remind ourselves again that the key features of a systematic review are that they are explicit, they use transparent methods, there's a standard set of stages, and they are accountable and replicable and updatable. Now, there are a number of different ways that you can go about understanding what this means in terms of what is a standard set of stages. What does accountability mean? How do we ensure that something is replicable and updatable? And one of the ways that we can do that is that can inform our understanding of what constitutes explicit, transparent methods is to consider PRISMA. Now, PRISMA is a reporting guideline. It was created by an extensive consultation with trials methodologists, synthesis methodologists, users of reviews, authors and editors in journals, to try and come up with some guidelines for people who do systematic reviews to help them in reporting those systematic reviews, so that all of the information that a consumer of these reviews would need to understand it, to be able to make a confident conclusion based on what's in the review. PRISMA stands for Preferred Reporting Items in Systematic Reviews and Meta-Analyses. This is the 2020 version. It's been updated. 2009 there was the original iteration of this, and the relevance of that will become clear later on. But you can see that when you're in a report of a systematic review, if it's following the standard set of stages and it's transparent and systematic, then you would expect to see things like a rationale which describes the review and the context, the objectives of the review, the eligibility criteria of the literature that is included in it, how things were searched for, how they were selected, the assessment of risk of bias or trustworthiness, the way that summary findings were calculated, so that synthesis could happen. There's expectations for the results, including, as you can see here, study selection, study characteristics, risk of bias, and so on and so forth, discussion, and then other information. This is, I think, is a very useful document, because not only does it tell us how to report a systematic review, but by implication it tells us what kinds of things we should be doing in our systematic reviews. For a systematic review to meet that aspiration of collecting the totality of relevant evidence on a particular question, and then drawing confident conclusions from that, then we need to ensure that not only do we report these things, but then of course we have to have done them in the first place. So I'm again, we'll return to PRISMA later on in the analysis of the ADESA database. PRISMA, just to prove that PRISMA is well understood to be helpful, we see PRISMA being recommended for use in the social sciences, in education, in master's and doctoral research, and happily, I'm pleased to say, this publication in 2022, applied linguistics. And so Scheiser, Albert, and Peniel say we would like to recommend authors of a wide range of research syntheses to follow and even perhaps adhere to the PRISMA as much as possible, to add to the rigor of their publications, as well as to promote and spread this practice of systematicity in reporting. So I'm setting PRISMA up there as one way in which we can try to ensure that the systematic reviews that we produce are conforming to the highest standards agreed across not just healthcare, where PRISMA was first developed, but through other areas of where research synthesis happens. It's also important to note it's not the only reporting guideline that exists, but it's certainly a very popular one. So another point here is that systematic reviews ought to inform primary research. So that's what I mean, that new primary research should start with a systematic review and it should end with a systematic review. And that means that people should refer to published systematic reviews before they start on any new primary research. And then when they've completed the primary research, that should be fed back in to the systematic review to see how or if it modifies the overall findings. And that's, again, that makes it very important that the methods of a systematic review are reported faithfully so that that update can happen. If a relevant systematic review does not exist, then I believe that researchers should prepare one. So how do we know if a relevant systematic review exists? Well, it's quite hard to find them sometimes. They're published all over the place. Sometimes they're published in the kind of in organizations like they publish in the Campbell collaboration that publishes only systematic reviews. The Epicenter provides a format for a forum for publishing them. Systematic Reviews Journal obviously is somewhere where you'll find systematic reviews, but they tend to be quite scattered. So to help with this, we my team and myself in Oxford created the International Database of Education Systematic Reviews, focusing on education in the round. But to begin with, we are using language education in the pilot stage. So IDESA, as is the way that I call it, is a free at the point of access electronic register of published systematic reviews in education and a clearinghouse for registering and publishing protocols of planned and ongoing systematic reviews in education. In its pilot phase, which is where it is now, it concentrates on systematic reviews in language education. We've used quite a liberal interpretation of systematic reviews to essentially mean a lit review with a method section. And we're operationalizing language education as systematic reviews with at least one language learning / language teaching outcome measure. Here's the team that created it. So there's me from the University of Oxford, my colleague Jessica Brown at the University of Bristol, and Anastasia Koryakina from the Epicenter, we're responsible for setting it up and a lot of the analysis of what's in IDESA. And then we've been ably and wonderfully supported by doctoral researchers at the University of Oxford, Johannes Schultz, Yu Hao, and Kate Hamilton. IDESA is also supported by an advisory committee. Again, we're very keen on interdisciplinarity. So we have people who are like Judy Seber, who's familiar with systematic review methodology in the social sciences, David Goff, likewise, Sarah Miller from Campbell, UK and Ireland. We've also got University of Oxford librarian Kathy Scutt, Hilda Bastian, who worked with Cochrane around a lot of the sort of conceptualization of this has been based. And then we've got representatives of consumers, so the OUP, and teachers with Alex Quigley there. So how did we create IDESA? Well, first of all, we needed to populate it with systematic reviews in education, and particular in language education. So Jess Brown took the lead on this part of it. She developed search terms with us, established a list of databases and journals to search. She performed the search. It was a very iterative and quite extensive process. But it must be noted that it's a work in progress. We try, what our aim is to find every single systematic review that's ever been published in language education. We know that we probably haven't done that just yet, but we think we've made a good start. So she searched for them. She harvested the bibliographic data from the databases and journal websites, screened them for eligibility basically on our two inclusion criteria, which were that they were a lit review with a method section and that they had a language teaching or learning outcome, and then logged them into the database. She searched 45 databases, 14 journals individually, but journals were also included in some cases in those databases. And so far we have 307 records. We are expecting to get more. This is what the website looks like, and I want to show you it in action. So I'm going to cross my fingers and hope that all this works when I click on the link. There we go. So as this loads up, you'll see that we've created an interface where you can find out if there is a systematic review on a topic that you're interested in, whether that's because you want to do some new primary research or because you want to have a look and see what we know already. My students find it very, very useful for when they're writing their essays because it gives you this nice overview of research. So that's what it looks like. You can search by putting in any search term you like. So if I put in vocabulary, and then I hit search, then up comes 77 hits, all of the items on IDESA which include the word vocabulary somewhere in the title or the abstract or in the keywords. And when you let's find one, a meta-analysis of some of them obviously more or less relevant, because as I say, vocabulary if that word comes up in the abstracts, keywords or title, then it will come up here. But when you click on that, you're taken to a page which shows you the main information about that systematic review. So who wrote it, what it's called, who wrote it, where you can find it, the abstract, a link to the original holding, and then also we provide a link here to the page of IDESA, where you can come back to this if you want. You don't just have to search by topic. You can search by author. So let's put in someone who I know has done many wonderful systematic reviews and meta-analyses, Luke Plonsky, and there we go. We've got all of Luke's, well, I hope all of the relevant studies by Luke. Luke, if I've missed any, do let me know. And again, you can see that we've got the information there about where you can find it. That obviously mentions Luke in somewhere in the abstract. So let's look at one that he is a co-author of. And so there you go. That gives you the idea about how IDESA works. You can also export this as a PDF so that you can keep it in your records. And just so that he doesn't feel left out, I want to show you Sin Wang's contributions as well. So there we go, 3 systematic reviews and meta-analyses with Sin Wang has been involved in. And also, this is a point that I'll get to a little later in the talk, information about protocols. So not only is it a place for you to look for published systematic reviews, it's also a place where you can publish protocols for systematic reviews. And just to give you a quick look, that's what a protocol looks like. This is one of Sin Wang's, and a permalink to that down here. And the relevance of that, I hope, will become clearer later on. This also allows because we, like we say, this is a work in progress. If there's a review that's that you know exists, which we don't have on our database, you can tell us about it. So you can click on that button there, and then you can enter information about a systematic review that we've missed, and then we'll assess it for eligibility and then put it on the database if we don't have it and it's eligible. And then there's some other information there, but do have a look at that. We want people to use it. We hope that it'll be useful. Like I say, it's a pilot phase. Our intention is to expand it to all of education in due course, but at the moment it's on language education. So that's IDESA. What can IDESA tell us? Well, in preparing this this database of systematic reviews, we felt, well, there's a huge treasure trove here of information about what's going on in language education, so that you can use that information to find out what IDESA can tell us about the state of the art in systematic reviewing in language education. So we conducted a study which has been written up and being considered for publication in the special issue of that Sin Wang talked about earlier. Our research questions were, what are the patterns of publication of systematic reviews in the field of language education? For example, or that is, how has the volume of published systematic reviews changed over time? Where have systematic reviews been published, and what topics have been the subject of syntheses? And also, we thought would be useful to have a look at was to what extent do systematic reviews in language education adhere to the best reporting conventions? And we kind of also make a sort of implicit assumption that well-reported studies are likely also to be well-conducted studies. So there's reporting conventions can be used as a proxy for methodological quality as well as a direct measure of reporting quality. So we extracted the following information to address the first research question: the name of the journal or other mode of publication, the publication date, and the keywords that were supplied by the authors. And then for research question 2, we audited every report for its adherence to PRISMA. And we used PRISMA 2009, and that's simply because when we did this, it was 2020, which was the year in which PRISMA 2020 was published. And so it hadn't been published by the time we started the work, and it couldn't have been adhered to by anybody prior to that. We also want to make the point that we're not in this analysis where we find that people haven't adhered to PRISMA. We're not trying to be critical. We're trying to point out where the field can improve and hopefully just make more noise, I suppose, about the importance of good quality conduct in systematic reviews and good quality reporting. And so we hope that the results of this presentation and the accompanying paper will help to promote that. So what are the pattern our results for going through it? Which, as I say, we harvested all of this data and analysed it. What are the patterns of publication of systematic reviews in the field of language education? So how has the volume of published systematic reviews changed over time? Where have systematic reviews been published, and what topics have been the subject of syntheses? Our search resulted in 307 eligible reports. 3 of these were available as preprints in 2020 when we conducted the audit, but were not formally published in 2021. So I've included data from those 2021 publications in all analyses that I will discuss here, but I've not used them, those 2021 preprints in the analysis of publication frequency, because that year is not complete. So on publication frequency, this slide illustrates the number of systematic reviews published in 5-year increments from 2001 to 2020, and a category for reviews published prior to 2001. There were 5 reviews published between 1985 and 2000, and the 2000 report was Norris and Ortega's Effectiveness of L2 Instruction, Research Synthesis and Quantitative Meta-Analysis. And this paper is widely regarded as seminal in the development of research syntheses in applied linguistics. And it's perhaps no coincidence that that period immediately afterwards marks a kind of serious interest in systematic reviews in language education. Between 2001 and 2005, 19 reports were published, with a further 21 between 2006 and 2010, which included Norris and Ortega's 2006 edited volume, Synthesizing Research on Language Learning and Teaching, which built on their earlier work. Now, if Norris and Ortega can be credited with kickstarting interest in the field, then the truth of this statement starts to mount in 2011. There were 84 reports in the period 2011 to 2015. And then that was indicative of a publication rate of systematic reviews nearly double of the entire period before that. And then this doubles again from 2016 to 2020, during which time 175 systematic reviews were published, 58% of the entire body of literature. So this is a real proper exponential curve. Where were they published? Well, in total, systematic reviews were published in 136 different outlets. Most of the reports, 270, that's 88%, were published in scholarly journals, but a small number were published by research centres, some as government reports, some as conference proceedings, some of book chapters, and some as master's or doctoral theses. And you can see here in this word cloud the sort of relative frequency of these different publishers. The majority of the people who have published systematic reviews in language education only published 1 or 2 over the period covered. This gives the more or less the same information, but in a slightly different format. It illustrates the frequency of publication by journal for those that have published 3 or more reports. Well, Language Learning Journal leads a field in more ways than one. Having published Norris and Ortega's seminal paper as its first systematic review in 2000, Language Learning has built consistently on that momentum and has published 22 reports, 3 between 2001 and 2005, 5 in the period 2006 to 2010, and 6 from 2011 to 2015, 7 between 2016 and 2020, and then 1 that was formally published in 2021. We can see that computer-assisted language learning is the second most frequent publisher. While it published one of the earliest ones in 1998, but the remaining 15 were published since 2010. Review of Educational Research published the oldest review in 1985, 2 reviews in 2005, and then 70% of its output was in the most recent decade represented here. And then you can see the sort of relative frequency of publication by other journals. And like I said, if language learning can be said to have fired the starting pistol, so to speak, then the field of educational technology appears to have taken the baton. So of the 25 journals in this slide, that's the ones who have published more than 3 or more, a third, 9 of them, are concerned with language learning and technology. And this relative dominance in the field is repeated in the remainder of the literature. So in addition to the more prolific language and technology journals, there are the smaller technology-focused journals in the data set. And in total, the aims and scope of 31 journals, which is 23% of the publishers, were explicitly concerned with language learning and technology, or educational technology more generally. And collectively, they've published 28% of the reviews on the database. The aims and scopes of the remaining journals, range from the expansive, like the Open Journal of Social Science, to the very niche, like the Journal of Special Education Apprenticeship. A little under half of the publishers, of 46%, were directly related to applied linguistics. 22 or 16% can be described as generalist education publishers, and then we have a big range of different focuses for the remaining. So from this analysis, we can see that systematic reviews in language learning are valued across the field in education. They're not confined to, or even mostly found in, specialist language learning journals, and so they are of interest to scholars working in a variety of related disciplines. I suppose the takeaway from this is that when you're embarking on new syntheses or new primary research, you should be taking account of not just the most obvious places to look, but should be looking in other outlets as well, or on IDESA. So that is frequency by publisher. Now we can have a look at frequency of keyword clusters in IDESA, i.e. what topics are being synthesized. So in order to assess this, we looked at all of the author-supplied keywords where they were made available. In total, there were 665 different keywords, and the vast majority of those, 490 of them, appeared only once in the data set, and 88 of them, 13%, only twice. The top 3 keywords were meta-analysis, review, and systematic review, which, given the fact that our data set was included only those kinds of research, is not terribly surprising. And when we did this analysis, we took those out, as well as anything else that related to methodology or methods rather than topics. So words like effect size and empirical research and research methods was done. And this analysis was done by Anastasia. I haven't got a picture of her against this slide, unlike the one with Jess, but just to give credit where it's due, this quite sort of in detail bit of work was done by her. So while it might be tempting to interpret the remaining 650 or so keywords as reflecting very broad and varied topics, actually it's a bit more mundane. There's lots of crossover. So we found, for example, words that are semantically very similar. So language education, language instruction, language pedagogy, language teaching, for example. So Anastasia collapsed words that were, or aggregated words that reflected the very, very similar or the same focuses. And so we took, for example, computer-assisted language learning, mobile-assisted language learning, computer-mediated communication, and other similar terms, and we put them together in a cluster that we called technology-mediated language learning, which is no surprise given what I've shown you already in terms of the journals, that is the biggest cluster of keywords. Again, we've got 2 large clusters there that say English language teaching and language teaching / learning. Again, unsurprising given our inclusion criteria. So we start to get more interesting information about what's being done when we look at the smaller circles around those larger ones. Although, as I say, I think this technology mediated one is very interesting. Why is it that computer mediated language learning is so popular for synthesis? I've made these slides available via my Twitter account and via the IDESA Twitter account. So if anyone wants to download them and look at them in more detail, please be my guest. So I won't belabor the analysis here. You can see what kinds of things are being or have been synthesized. And I hope that findings like these will allow prospective systematic reviewers to get a sense of the extent to which their field of interest is already represented. And then you can go to IDESA, read the reports and praise them to see whether they're any good, and then decide whether new syntheses or updating is needed or new research is needed on the basis of that. So that's on topic and publications. And so we're going to now move to the quality of reporting. So in order to do that, we took we looked at every single report that's in the database, and we looked to see whether it included the items on the PRISMA checklist. This is that second question of what extent do they adhere to the best reporting conventions. This is our overall findings. So you have a graph here that shows the percentage of reports including the item in the dark blue, and then the percentage of reports omitting the item in the light blue. You might not be able to see that very well, so I'm going to look at sections of it in turn. So among the most regularly reported items are those that you would expect to find in any report of any kind of research, really. That's the background and rationale, statement of the objectives, a conclusion. However, even among some of these most basic conventions, there are instances where reviewers have not addressed them or done so perfunctorily that they don't meet a standard expected from the field. So, for example, a relatively small but I would say alarming number, 19%, did not have an explicit statement of the objectives of the review or the questions being addressed, leaving the reader to try to infer what the reviewers are trying to accomplish. In terms of articulating the background, again, most people know that we need to start with the literature review, but again, a small proportion just provided a definition of terms and then nothing much else. Happily, a lot of them did refer to prior systematic reviews. In terms of the title, we need to go back a slide, I think, for that one, but no, there we go, title down here. We can see that about 2/3 included the term systematic review or meta-analysis in their titles. And we understand that given our relatively liberal interpretation of what constitutes a systematic review, that some authors may not have realized that they were doing a systematic review and not use these terms. But I hope, and we hope, that the increasing understanding of best practice in this field will lead authors to routinely include one or both of these terms in the titles of their reviews so that people can find them. Good systematic reviews stand apart from other types of review because they pay particular attention to the method by which data were collected and analysed. In some respects, a systematic review is the method. So if reviewers do not fully report their methods, then the authority of the review might be questioned. If readers don't know, for example, where reviewers looked for reports of research or what search terms they used, then there's no real way to assess how thorough their search was. Remembering that we consider systematic reviews to try to generate the totality of the relevant available evidence. If they don't assess the trustworthiness, for example, then readers can't make an informed assessment of the strength of the overall findings and so on. So failing to fully report the method also makes it impossible to replicate or update a review. And our analysis demonstrates quite disappointingly, really, that full reporting of methods is far from routine. Some of the better represented items were information sources and eligibility criteria. Most 87% indicated where they'd searched, and some of them gave a complete list of the databases that were consulted, but others were unclear. And this is where I get pernickety about semantics. But for example, in one of the reports, we find the quote, the databases search included language learning abstracts, ERIC, blah, blah, blah. But it's not clear whether that means included but not limited to, or whether the listed databases were the sum total. Like I say, it might sound like a minor semantic point, but I think clarity matters. And the second most frequently reported methods item was eligibility criteria. But there was certainly, there's about a quarter of those which weren't reported, making it difficult to really understand what the review was about. Related to the search strategy, fewer than half included a list of the search terms used to locate eligible evidence. Of those that did, many did not report the Boolean syntax that they were used, which is one of the things that Prisma asked for, and they list the search terms. And then we also found that sort of the similar semantic issue. So people saying things like, there was one report where, I'm not going to name and shame on this, but there was a report that said some of the keywords used in the database search were, inviting the question, well, why only some? Or why report only some? Like I say, I think that these are small but important points, and they're the kind of thing that can be caught with the keen eye of peer reviewers and journal editors. Other notable omissions in reporting of the methods were related to process. Just over half the reported processes reported the process of selecting studies. There were omissions in reporting which data items were collected and the way that the evidence was synthesized. So we don't know how the evidence, how they plan to synthesize the evidence. And you know, while you know, examples like synthesis of results and summary measures may not be appropriate for some kinds of research, I think it's still important to say how what the approach to synthesis was by the researchers, so that, or the reviewers, so that the reader can understand what the review is intended to tell us. It's also useful to know, for example, if meta-analysis wasn't possible, then why? Were studies so dissimilar that meta-analysis would have made sense? Were people not reporting their data in enough detail to allow a meta-analysis to take place? And if we know these things, then we can start to address those through new research, if necessary. Here we get down to the elements which were least well reported on the basis of the PRISMA checklist. So two of the least well represented items in the literature related to how risk of bias was assessed, both for individual studies and across the review as a whole. And while risk of bias is a term that's perhaps most associated with experimental designs, you can still do trustworthiness appraisal for all sorts of designs, and there are tools to help with appraising the trustworthiness of qualitative studies. There's ones for cross-sectional studies and all sorts of different things. So we think that's really important, because if you don't understand the trustworthiness of research, you can't really make an informed conclusion based on what's told in the review. And I'd say I won't belabor this, but I just want to show here that the protocol registration was really poorly represented. Only 10 reports mentioned having a protocol, and only 3 of those made them available. 1 in an appendix published with the report, 1 on request by email, and 1 in a supplement in online supplementary materials. And we found no links to prospectively published protocols, which may be explained by a historical lack of a dedicated space to publish these kinds of things, which we hope that IDESA will help with. And I'll tell you about that in the last sort of 10 minutes or so of this talk. Finally, on our analysis of publication patterns, and we wanted to know whether people had got better over time as systematic reviewing and meta-analysis had sort of, you saw in that first slide of these data how how many have been published, and the rate in which interest in synthesis of this kind is going. We wanted to see if people had basically got better over time, and unfortunately it wasn't very happy reading. So you can see that there's fairly stable over time. Roughly about 50% of PRISMA items are reported, right from from pre-2001 all the way up to the present day. Slightly higher in the past, and we can see that Norris and Ortega, their study in 2000, that reported 93%. This was before PRISMA was even published. So in 9 years before PRISMA, people still understood what constituted a good systematic review. And so they reported on 93% of the items that are in PRISMA. And then here the epicenter, who have been very important in the development of systematic reviewing and evidence syntheses in the social sciences. The relevant reviews that they had conducted were published between 2004 and 2005, and they reported 74 to 85% of PRISMA items. So there's some room for improvement, I think. I just want to say, like I say, talk very briefly about systematic review protocols. The protocol, well, first of all, what is a protocol and why should they be registered? Well, reminding ourselves that a systematic review of research literature is supposed to be explicit, systematic, and accountable. We should be able to replicate, we should be able to understand the work. So like any research study, a systematic review needs a detailed protocol that describes in advance the processes and methods that will be applied. And this protocol includes a description and rationale for the review question and the proposed methods, and includes details of how different types of study will be located, appraised, and synthesized. That's coming from a social scientist. Here's in this book here about educational systematic reviews. Again, we're making the point that publishing a protocol helps, or having a protocol in the first place helps to keep the review team. And Sin Wang made the point that these are, lots of work involved in this, and often with a number of people being involved in producing a review. And so this keeps everyone on the same page. And then also it allows us this opportunity to update or repeat or replicate. Now in this book here, it suggests that you can register your protocol through databases such as Prospero. You can't, because Prospero doesn't accept registration of protocols unless they have a health-related outcome. It can be an educational health-related outcome. It can be a systematic review on education, so anti-smoking education, for example, but it's got to have this health-related thing. So so it's important that we try and find somewhere we can do this in outside of Prospero, and then it's, you know, we register protocols so that again, it's publicly, we sort of declare I'm about to do a systematic review. It gets put onto the into the public domain, and then it can't be lost from view. Ideally, it's there so that people can find, you know, for those sort of who are interested, can then go and follow up and find out where the review is. If it hasn't been published, then why not? And this is helpful in terms of protecting against the kind of, you know, file drawer problem of not publishing research. And, you know, just more sort of generally, we should be adhering to the highest standards of quality and rigor. So say error and bearer. So who am I to argue with that? You can register a protocol. So this is a little bit of a sales pitch. We want people to use IDESA to register their protocols. It's now open to all fields of education, even though the database of published systematic reviews is still focusing on language education. It uses Prisma P, which is the protocol extension for Prisma, which you can see here, which asks you to state the title, the authors, the support, you know, the sort of administrative information there, then to include some information about your rationale and your objectives, and so on and so forth. It goes through. In fact, you can see it a bit better on this. These are all the items that are asked for. You can download a copy of Prisma P from this website here. Then let's go back to that. So then by prospectively publishing your protocol, you do the things that I've suggested there. You make it known to the world that it exists. People can avoid the waste of duplicating effort. If they can see that a protocol is already there, that a review is in process, then they can perhaps divert their attention somewhere else, or indeed collaborate. And again, as Sin Wang's been saying, we're all about collaboration and cross-disciplinarity here. So we hope that people will use IDESA to publish their protocols, and as a kind of, with a hope that that we create some kind of virtuous circle. In that, if you take the effort to produce a well-constructed protocol at the beginning of the process, that hopefully has a knock-on effect on the kind of methods you're using, so that synthesis will be using high-quality methods, and then high-quality reporting of those methods as well. And this is the idea, is that if people get into this habit, then we can develop the field, and perhaps where I showed you the room for improvement, there will be improvement. That's our hope. So my sort of concluding thoughts are that improving the discoverability of systematic review means better decision making. Providing a protocol registration means better quality research, better reporting, potential to reduce research waste, and opportunities for collaboration. And then some recommendations on the back of the research that we've done. Firstly, I think that prospective reviewers should take all efforts to assess how likely their proposed review is to advance our field by referring to and appraising, so finding out how well done these reviews have been, what's already been synthesized before embarking on any additional research. I think that plans for new systematic reviews should be documented in carefully prepared protocols, which are then published. IDESA is a great place to do that, but it's not the only place. There are others. I think that training programs could probably do a better job of embedding use of Prisma as a set of guiding principles for complete reporting of systematic reviews. But also that perhaps methodologists, in the same way that the original Prisma working group did, is that they review Prisma to assess its fit for systematic reviews in language education, or any field that's applied linguistics more generally. And if it's not, if there are things that ought to be changed that don't quite work for us, then that we develop a field-specific extension. So that people say that here is Prisma LA, language acquisition, or SLA, or AP, AL, should I say. Until such time, I think journal editors should expect authors to use Prisma to ensure full and transparent reporting of submissions to their journals. So that's my pitch. That's my findings of the research. Like I say, it's a project in process. We know that we will find more systematic reviews, and we will refine our attempts to help our people understand the state of the art. But we hope you like the start that we've made, and we'd love to hear from you. There's contact information there if you want to get in contact with me, or you want to go and see the website for yourself, and then there's references. But like I say, I've tweeted both on the IDESA account and my personal account a PDF of this slide presentation, so it's all there for you. So I hand back to Sin Wang. Thank you very much, everybody.
Thank you very much, Hamish, for the presentation. I've already popped in the chat the link to Hamish's presentation and also the link to IDESA. So everybody should have access to those two links. I think very interesting presentation, a lot of information, and if you want to read more about the presentation, Hamish's paper is coming out in the special issue, so you can read the full version of it later on. We have a question already, Hamish, in the chat. So would you please recommend an excellent research study in language education that systematically reviewed its constructs? That's a hard one.
Yeah, no, I would say, unfortunately, I don't keep all of the information of all 307 systematic reviews in language education in here, but they are on IDESA. So that's a place to look for. I mean, a good, if you want to see good quality systematic reviews, then start with Norris and Ortega. I mean, that was a great one, but there's many more of that. And like I say, I would just encourage you to explore the website. But I say I don't know off the top of my head. That's beyond my capabilities, I'm afraid.
Right, thank you. Yeah, so now we're open for questions. We have around 8 minutes before the break, so you can either type in the chat, or if you would like to ask the questions yourselves, please raise your hand and I will call your name. I wonder, Hamish, if you can tell us a little bit more about, in terms of procedure, because you have talked about the importance of registering a protocol, but I wonder if people are interested in uploading or submitting a protocol to IDESA, what are the steps?
Okay, now what I might try to do is see if I can share the, let me see if I can share the website, and I'll show you the process. Let me just need to log into it. I'm just going to make sure that I've actually got a, okay, so I'm going to here we go. I should be seeing that. Right. So when you go to the IDESA website, you can set up an account, and you can, and this is just I've got some tests in here. I don't actually have any in there myself. It's just been testing. But you set up an account, and then you can register your record. So we provide a template which you can download from one of the other pages on the website. But once you've had a look at that, then you're taken to this. You say, right, I'm going to put a protocol up onto the website. You just check that it meets the inclusion and submission guidance, and then you start registering a review. So we get started here. Here's what the form looks like. Again, this is, like I say, is based on Prisma P. You put in the information that's contained in Prisma P. So the title, contacting author, corresponding authors. You put your review questions in. Again, that was one of the things that we were really shocked by when looking at the IDESA content of IDESA, that people didn't include research questions in some cases. So we're trying to force people's hands in that respect. A rationale, what's the point of this? What's the justification for doing this? The rationale for doing the research. Your inclusion criteria, your information sources, search strategy, and so on. And there is some tips underneath each to give you an idea about what should go in there. When that is completed, you submit it, and then that comes to me or somebody else on the team to review. And now when we review it, we don't make any judgment on the necessity of the review or even the quality of what's in there. We just look to see whether all of those fields have been filled in, and we might provide advice if things are missing. So in some circumstances, I'll get one and there's nothing in, you know, there's sort of a misinterpretation. Someone has said, I will be using Prisma to assess risk of bias. So what I can do then is refer it back to the submitter and say, you said you're going to use Prisma for risk of bias, but that's not a risk of bias tool. So can you please have a look at these things? Might be a helpful thing to look at. And then so it gets referred back, and then revisions can be made, and then it comes back to me, and if the revisions are all in good order, then I'll publish it on the site. It also allows for updating. Now, life doesn't always go the way we planned. Sometimes reviews have to be adapted and changed. So if people find that something has changed, you can go back to the protocol, update it, putting in a note as to why there was an update, and then that will be published with a date stamp. So you have an audit trail. So again, it's trying to keep people honest, but so that you can say, well, we basically didn't find anything here that met our search question. So we had another look at alternative databases, and we came up with some other databases that we'd missed. So we've added those into the search strategy. And so, like I say, you can update it. It will be date stamped, so that we know that it's a second iteration, and you can put in notes as to why the changes happened. And I think that's it. I mean, it's all fairly straightforward. And I say, hopefully, it's something that people will find useful. Like I say, there isn't a dedicated space for protocols. There are other things like Open Science Framework where you can publish a protocol, but this is trying to simplify the process and make it specific for education.
Thank you very much. I think we have time for one more question. Jim has a question about the role of journal editors. So is there anything specific journal editors can do to encourage better quality systematic review submissions? Speaking from Jim's experience as editor of System, he said, we welcome systematic reviews, but the rejection rate is high.
Right. I think that well, with a bit of a luck, this is going to be some kind of virtuous circle. And I think that, as Talia has just said in the chat, ask them to use Prisma. I mean, it's straightforward. If I get sent as a peer reviewer a systematic review for review, then I will say at the top of my response, I have reviewed this with Prisma next to me. And I'll go through and say, these are the things that are here, and these are the things that aren't. And then depending on the extent of what's missing, I will then make a recommendation whether to publish or not. And so I think that I do think that, Jim, brilliant that you're here and you're listening to this, and I hope this is useful. I do think that encouraging in your submission guidelines, submissions of systematic reviews which adhere to some kind of reporting guideline, I would recommend Prisma. There are others, but certainly, and Prisma until we come up with, or unless we come up with something alternative. I don't necessarily think we do need to come up with something alternative, but that's for others to decide. But that would be my suggestion, is to say, systematic reviews must adhere to Prisma. Not Cochrane, Campbell, for example, Campbell journals, they have a much more extensive set of reporting guidelines. It's massive, it's huge. But they're very clear in their instructions to authors. It will be desk rejected if it doesn't have all of these things, and all of the things on their checklist. And so the Prisma checklist is quite handy, I think, as to send in as a with your systematic review when you submit it to the journal. I think it would be very handy to also submit the Prisma checklist, because down the right-hand column of the checklist, it allows you to put the page number of where that item has been addressed. And so that would be very useful for journal editors, very useful for peer reviewers, so that they can say, okay, so the title does include these words. Okay, that's on page 1. The approach to synthesis is on page 14, and so on and so forth. I think that would be the way to solve that one.
Thank you very much. I've just popped in the chat the Prisma checklist that Hamish talked about. Also put another link, Prisma's flow diagram, which is also very helpful in documenting your search process, your screening process as well. Yeah, so I think it's perfectly on time. Hamish, thank you very much for your talk. And of course, later on, if we have some more questions, we can take those at the very end. But now I think, because it's a pretty long event, I think we should maybe take a short break before we come back for Luke's plenary. So 15 minutes. So if you're in the UK, it's 4:30 now. So 4:45, we'll come back. I'll keep the room open and the recording will go on, but feel free to take a break, grab a coffee or tea. I'll see you in 15 minutes.
Thank you.
Okay, so welcome back. I guess we will resume. Our next plenary speaker is Dr. Luke Plonsky. I'll hand over to Ping Ping to introduce our speaker and the topic.
Thanks, Wang. Welcome back, everyone. Hope you just enjoy your nice break. It's my honor to introduce Dr. Luke Plonsky. So, Dr. Luke Plonsky is Associate Professor of Applied Linguistics at Northern Arizona University, where he teaches course in second language acquisition and research methods. His work in these and other areas has resulted in over 100 articles, book chapters, and books. Luke is editor of Studies in Second Language Acquisition, managing editor of Foreign Language Annals, co-editor of the Guter-Mouton's series on language acquisition, and co-director of the IRIS database. In addition to prior appointments at Georgetown and University College London, Luke has lectured in China, Japan, the Netherlands, Poland, Spain, and Puerto Rico. So, the title of Luke's presentation today is Research Synthesis in Applied Linguistics, Core Concepts and Future Directions. So, without further ado, I am going to hand over to Dr. Luke Plonsky. And
Luke, you're
sorry.
on mute, I think. Yeah.
Rookie move. Can you hear me and see me okay?
Yes, perfect.
Okay, great. Thank you so much, Ping Ping, for introducing me, and Xin Wang and the whole team for all you've done to organize this. Xin Wang, you're so good at putting together events. I'm always so impressed, and I'm honored to be part of this. This is so exciting. The launching of this SIG. I can already sort of feel. I don't know about you all, but I can sort of feel already the kind of buzz and energy around and the momentum building behind research synthesis and synthetic efforts and all the kind of meta science that's happening in relation to this. So super cool and exciting. I have here, so I'm talking about core concepts and possible future directions. I'll spend some time at the end of the talk introducing and suggesting maybe some future directions. You know, we have kind of a little bit of a balance here of looking back and reflecting, like Hamish was talking a little bit about some of their meta research on synthetic research and systematic reviews, and then taking that to make recommendations for future research. Complementary to that, what I'm going to try to do is introduce some core concepts, but then also suggest maybe some future directions of ways that we can expand our methodological repertoire in terms of systematic reviews and research synthesis and meta-analysis. And I'm going to kind of use those terms, by the way, interchangeably. Different avenues or directions that we could apply or explore in terms of our application of synthetic techniques, but also research on the ways that we do research in the field. And so that's what I'll do a little bit of, but also along the way, like I said, kind of introducing some core concepts, sort of key fundamentals. And so a couple sort of preliminary, additional preliminary comments. I just have here this image of the Grand Canyon. I live for two reasons. I live about it's sort of maybe a little bit of an index towards just where I'm coming from. I live about an hour away from the Grand Canyon National Park, which is a lovely place. It's sort of part of the local culture, very much of where I live here in Arizona. But also, to me, the image sort of represents this kind of bird's eye view that we get from the synthetic approach. And I have to say that the synthetic approach, the synthetic ethic, which Norris and Ortega called it in their 2006 chapter, and it's not an exaggeration to say that it's been life and career changing for me. This sort of new lens, and I know that many of you who are here right now are already interested in research synthesis and meta-analysis and systematic review, and so maybe you're already sort of on board with that. But if you're not, I just encourage you to consider it and to consider it deeply, because I have found it to be absolutely career changing. Not in that I've published a bunch of research syntheses or meta-analyses or a bunch of synthetic research, although that has had an impact on my career as well. What I mean more importantly is that it's really changed the way that I see everything. I don't I view almost all research as all primary research kind of even through the lens of through a synthetic lens. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in a little bit. But I also see this as providing huge potential huge potential, as Hamish was talking about, huge potential for practice. To me, this is not, some people who come into meta-analysis or synthesis from a unfamiliar with it to begin with, I think they think of it as like kind of technical and statistical in nature, and it's really not. To me, this is the way. This is a heavy on the methods and heavy on sort of research and diving into the nitty gritty of a particular domain. But to me, this is a window into informing one of the most powerful windows we have to inform practice in second language education. Is because, you know, similar to again, similar to what Hamish was saying, we get there's massive potential to inform the ways that we provide instruction to other practical issues like language policy and curriculum and materials development and language assessment, teacher training. This is the way that we can act, and I would actually argue this is the way that we can act as a scholarly community most ethically, by considering not a single study or a couple influential studies or a couple studies published by big names in the field. No, the meta-analysis and the meta-analytic point of view takes all of this into consideration and brings it together in a sort of, in a way, blind to status or blind to publication outlet manner or approach. And I think that's very, very powerful and can contribute greatly to our knowledge and therefore our practice in language education. And even beyond that, I would say that this can be a tool that in terms of for efficiency, so informing practice, but also by taking a synthetic or meta-analytic point of view, you know, all of us as scholars, we're all super limited in how much we can consume and read, and this is it could be used as an efficiency strategy for all of us as scholars, but also for the practitioner community. Think about your typical classroom foreign language teacher. Are they diving into the primary literature? Maybe some of them would like to, and but and I know there are folks here who have written about this, Jim McKinley, and sort of that researcher practitioner connection. There was a special issue just out in Modern Language Journal, and I encourage you to check that out. I think that was edited by Sean Lowen and Masatoshi Sato on this researcher practitioner connection. But there's your typical classroom educator or practitioner isn't going to go out and read the primary literature for lots of good reasons, and I'm not placing any blame on those individuals, but a meta-analysis can provide them in a way a really efficient kind of shortcut to gain a lot of the knowledge that they might be looking for. Okay, so that's what I say is preliminary. Oh, one other thing I'll say is, Hamish, I loved your talk. I found I so much what you're saying. I was just like, yes, and I'm taking notes along the way. So thank you so much for that inspiration. I love what you're working on right now. So just to kind of ease us into it, I want us to kind of think for a minute about, you know, we've all written a lit review, you know, for a class that we've taken or for a manuscript that we're working on. And I just want to get us into what we get out of the synthetic approach. I want us to think about for a minute, what does it get us in comparison to or in contrast with a traditional review? And for most of us, when we write a traditional literature review, whether it's a standalone literature review or the literature review for an empirical study, our process is probably going to look you could agree or disagree, but I'm guessing for most of us that process would be, okay, we have a kind of a topic in mind, and then we go out and we go onto the library databases and we do some searches, and then we download some articles that we think you know, more or less address the questions that are related to the issues or the topics that we're trying to understand. And then we'll start taking notes, and we may insert sticky notes into the PDFs of the articles that we're reading. Maybe we take notes in a Word document, something like that. And then until we think we have enough information to start writing a lit review, and we maybe organize findings or organize articles or studies into topics or sub-themes or maybe the studies that do find support for X, or that don't find support for X, that do show a relationship between X and Y, or don't show a relationship between X and Y. And this approach is probably comfortable to a lot of us, and I think a lot of us have written those types of papers before. And the advantage is that, you know, we as the researcher have a big say in the shape of that literature review. The disadvantage is that we as the researcher have a big say in the shape of that literature review. And what I mean by that is there's kind of like a lot of room for bias. There's bias in terms of what articles, where we search, in terms of what articles we might download or choose to include or prioritize. And there's bias in terms of the way that we interpret the findings of those studies. It's one of the big problems is bias. The other problem would be the lack of systematicity and comprehensiveness of the process. And so, you know, I'd ask you, might it be that some of us might be more or less likely to include articles that are published in highly visible or prestigious outlets, to include or heavily weight in our interpretation articles or studies that are published by big name scholars or by people who come from a theoretical orientation that we happen to align with. Sure, that's probably the case. And so when we engage in those kind of practices and those kinds of reviewing of literature, we're really inserting, in some cases, yes, inserting our expertise, but we're also inserting a large potential for bias into those reviews. And so what we get from the synthetic or meta-analytic approach is we get actually beyond, we improve on all of those. And how do we do that? Well, we're talking about, you know, I'm gonna talk a little bit occasionally about meta-analysis in particular, but then also sometimes more generally about research synthesis and the systematic approach to research in general. But what we get from a meta-analysis is we are converting the process of reviewing a body of literature into a scientific enterprise. And I'll add to that a corporate enterprise. And I don't mean corporate like Microsoft and Apple and stuff. Of course, I mean corporate Coca-Cola. What I mean is corporate like us as a body of scholars that are interested in a common question or topic or issue. So much of what we do, sometimes I feel that we're acting a little bit too independently, and when what we want to be doing is acting more more like a community, more like hey, we're all kind of in this together kind of mindset and approach. And okay, so we could define it as an empirical approach to reviewing findings in a given domain. That would be sort of secondary or research synthesis. And what we get to kind of overcome some of those problems of traditional ways of reviewing literature is we get greater systematicity, we get a greater objectivity, and greater transparency. And again, these are kind of like hallmarks of science, right? Is the systematicity, objectivity, and transparency. And that's what I mean by converting the process of reviewing previous existing research into a scientific enterprise. Okay, and so how do these play out? Well, we're gonna see in the synthetic approach that as opposed to the traditional approach, we're gonna see exhaustive rather than selective searches. And so what we're aiming to do is we're trying to collect a sample of studies, and we don't, you know, often talk about, in traditional lit reviews, don't really talk about the literature that goes into the lit review as being a sample, but each of those studies, we often talk about parallels between primary and secondary research. Each of those studies is going to be like a participant, and we're aiming for our sample of primary studies to approximate the population of studies. And what is the population of studies? The population of studies is every single study that has addressed a question of interest. Okay, so we're aiming to be exhaustive, and by doing so, we're able to greatly increase the generalizability of our findings, and we're able to decrease, if not remove, ideally, the bias that we as the researcher might bring to that process. Now, I think that's probably saying too much to say that, you know, we could absolutely remove the bias, because we come into any, we have to recognize, we come into any study. It doesn't matter how objective you think you are, or how hands-off you think you are. We make decisions along the way in the conduct of any study, and your experience and your expertise, your background, your connections, and your network are going to, where you grew up, the education system that you were trained in. All of these things are going to influence the way that you conduct a study and the way that you interpret the results of it. So there's no completely removing bias, but we can try to reduce bias. The synthetic approach also, in contrast with the traditional lit review kind of approaches, we're gonna, like I said, sort of try to be systematic and empirical about it. And so we code the study features and the effects of the studies that we observe in a very systematic, systematic manner, as opposed to in a traditional lit review where we would subjectively or idiosyncratically interpret the results. So this is maybe an exaggeration, but this might be what our notes look like if we sort of just like, we're taking a traditional approach. We're reading articles and we're sort of taking notes in the margins and, marking things that we find to be important or useful or informative, as opposed to the systematic or synthetic approach, which again kind of treats each primary study as a participant, and we code each study for all the features and the effects, the outcomes that we think matter. A third key feature, especially relevant in the case of meta-analysis, is the use of effect sizes. And effect sizes give us more precise, more stable, more intuitive, and much more informative information about statistical outcomes, sort of in contrast with p-values. And maybe just to continue this parallel with traditional lit reviews, traditional lit review might interpret findings based on whether or not there was found to be a statistically significant difference between two different conditions, or whether or not the relationship or the correlation between two variables was statistically significant. And we know for lots of different reasons that that's not going to be where we actually want to be headed. And I'll talk a little bit more about that actually in a couple of minutes. Okay, yeah, so that's just the formula for D, which is a very common effect size, and I know many of you know this, just expresses the difference between two groups in a standardized index. Because of these huge benefits, we've seen the growth of meta-analysis just really blowing up across the sciences, looking across all these different fields, in the broader language sciences, and then in applied linguistics certainly as well. This is sort of just mirroring what Hamish was showing based on similar data. This is from a bibliography of secondary research that I maintain on my website. And so anyway, we can see that really dramatic growth over time in this area, thanks to all those benefits that we've seen. And it's not only that. I think one thing for us to keep in mind is that yes, there's been a lot more synthetic research over the years, but it really matters that we get this right. It matters. Why? Because these studies tend to be more highly cited, more visible, and as a result, arguably to have a higher impact. This is a little bit of evidence from that claim. This is back from a couple decades ago already, but this is looking at impact based on citations of different types of studies. And this one found that of all these different study types, randomized controlled trials, cohort studies, case studies, non-systematic reviews, decision and cost effectiveness analyses, that the meta-analyses in this particular sample were the ones that were the most frequently highly cited. And this I just feel like this puts a little bit more, shows that it puts a little bit more of the burden of responsibility. Hamish was talking about some of the problems that we have, and I think we have to come to terms with those problems, those weaknesses, methodological weaknesses, weaknesses in terms of quality and rigor and transparency, some of which are fairly concerning. And it makes it even that, it's every study, to me, I've come to view study quality through the lens of ethics, and the idea that we're only actually acting ethically as researchers to the extent that we're actually carrying out high quality, high transparency research. If we're not carrying out research of really, really high methodological quality, I think we're actually acting unethically as researchers. That burden that we carry transfers, even exponentially, I feel, at the meta-analytic level because of the likely higher impact that meta-analyses and secondary research more generally often have on our field. By the way, I think this would make for an interesting study to replicate in applied linguistics, looking at the impact via citation of different types of empirical studies or non-empirical studies as well in applied linguistics. Somebody wants to dive into that project, I'd be interested to hear about it. Okay, so part of what I want to do here is to talk about different types of secondary research. Sin Wang and I have a paper under review, I think, that he mentioned, that is introducing a kind of taxonomy. And Hamish also mentioned a different taxonomy. There's several out there. Here are a couple more in addition to the one that Hamish mentioned. And so as I see it, we kind of have at the highest level of this taxonomy, we have sort of just the idea of lit reviews or secondary research overall. And then we have more traditional and largely non-systematic types of reviews. And then we have systematic reviews, which you could also put under the umbrella of research synthesis. And within that, you can have qualitative systematic research syntheses, and you can have quantitative systematic research syntheses. Okay, just to kind of lay out kind of the broad strokes of all these things we've been mentioning, and Hamish again, mentioned a bunch of different types of syntheses and how there's almost been kind of like a proliferation of different types of synthetic research, and I think that's healthy. Yeah, I think that can cause a little bit of confusion, but I think that we're exploring different ways of conducting meta-science. Ioannidis has a really nice article, I think it's like 2017, where he kind of just lays out kind of a framework for meta-science and goes into sort of 5 different broad categories of meta-science, and this would fall under 2 or 3 of those different broad categories. So Sin Wang and I have this paper, and this is not necessarily meant to be an exhaustive list, but we have here I just wanted to introduce kind of briefly some of the different options that are out there. I mean, I'm saying that this is a powerful approach to understanding the way that we do research, and there are many different techniques that we can use. So I just want to kind of run through these briefly with you all. And I want to emphasize again that this is not necessarily exhaustive, and also that these are not necessarily mutually exclusive. Some of these certainly overlap with others, and in some of the secondary synthetic projects that I've been a part of, definitely cross over into multiple categories. Some of these, and these are some of the more common ones, historical reviews, and I'm just giving some examples along the way. That in case anybody wants to look into those, and also I'll mention here because I'm referring to a bunch of different research. If anybody is interested in any of these, you don't have access to it, I'm always more than happy to send you anything I refer to in the talk. I'll just send you the PDF. Just say, hey Luke, can you send me Tulloch and Ortega 2017? I'll send it right over. Okay. So Al-Houri's historical review of motivation research. You have a couple examples there of scoping reviews and scoping reviews. I'm not going to describe all of these really in depth. The scoping reviews kind of like take a lay of the land, a sort of overview of what's out there, maybe in a topic, and not necessarily related to a research question. And oftentimes, I recommend I teach a seminar on meta-analysis here at Northern Arizona University about every 2 years. And sometimes I actually recommend that my students, if they don't yet know, if they're interested in a topic, but they don't yet know what is a question that is meta-analyzable yet, I'll sometimes suggest that they first engage in a scoping review that sort of covers the whole topic area to figure out what's out there, what research questions have been addressed fairly comprehensively or fairly thoroughly up to the present, and then they might be able to identify the topic of a question that is meta-analyzable within that broad topic. because you got a few examples there. Rapid reviews are fairly rare, but I've just become recently aware of a couple, one by our valiant organizer, Sin Wang, and then one by Murphy et al. And I believe Hamish is a co-author in that paper as well. So I'd recommend checking out those rapid reviews. That's new to me, and I need to become more familiar with that area of synthetic research. Reliability generalization meta-analysis. This is essentially a type of meta-analysis instead of aggregating effect sizes across studies, actually aggregates reliability coefficients. And I've been involved in a bunch of those different types of projects where we're looking oftentimes in those studies, we're looking at a particular construct that has been measured a lot, or we're looking at a particular instrument or instrument type, and we're interested in finding out the extent to which that instrument has produced internal consistency estimates, which I know is very, very niche and narrow, but that can be important. And then we can also look at, of course, we can run moderator analysis to understand to what extent the reliability estimate of the measurements of that particular construct, they vary across different features of the sample, features of the instrument, features of the setting, things like that. So in the case of Saito and Plonsky 2019, my wonderful collaborator Kazuya Saito at UCL, we proposed a kind of a new framework for measuring L2 pronunciation, and the framework included at its most finely grained level 6 different types of measures, and then we looked at the reliability coefficients across those different measures. Methodological synthesis is a technique that I've been involved in a lot in recent years, and this is essentially applying research synthetic techniques to the process of understanding methodological practices, and those types of studies can be focused on a particular substantive domain. Like the first one I was involved in was the Plonsky and gas 2011, where we looked at the methods of interactionist SLA, or it can be focused on a particular research technique. And the last one here I mentioned Plonsky and Gombar. We're looking at just the use and the reporting of multiple regression analysis in L2 research. And so it can be, they have those 2 different types of kind of scopes. And the idea here is not only to look back to describe and evaluate previous research in those domains as defined, but to then use that information to describe and evaluate empirically, but then to very critically use that information to make empirically grounded recommendations for future research. The idea here now, and Hamish again was talking about this before, the idea is not to criticize. I'm not coming into this, and I think it's important that we all as a synthetic community don't come into this research from a kind of critical point of view. Like, we're not here to call people out. We're not here to say you're doing it wrong. We're here to inform and then look forward to how we can improve the ways that we do research to and then inform our knowledge about language learning, language teaching, language education, language usage, curriculum, policy, practice, all these things. Okay, so I think it's really important that we, and I think this SIG can have a role in this, in sort of setting the tone to see ourselves as in support of each other, to see ourselves in support of this community of applied linguistics, not to be pointing fingers or naming people. I've had reviewers in articles of mine tell me, you should identify the author of this paper. Whoever did that, they need to be named. And I totally disagree. I totally disagree. I think because that takes the emphasis away from the research and it puts it on the researcher. And I don't think that's what we want. We want to improve the ideas and the methods. I'm not here to be pointing fingers at individual people. And I hope you guys, I'm sure you guys agree with me on that, but I think that we as a community can hopefully have a say in setting that tone. And then research synthesis, which is kind of a broad category, and meta-analysis. I have a few more as well. Critical reviews, I'm not going to talk about these as much. Mixed reviews, which might combine different aspects or different techniques. Might also include qualitative and quantitative review techniques. Narrative reviews. And this article here, Thompson and Derwing, is a nice example of, well, that whole special issue. That was a special issue in Applied Linguistics in 2015. And what the editors of the special issue did was they invited 6 teams on 3 topics to write a meta-analysis and a non-systematic review on 3 different topics. And so you then could kind of compare and contrast. For those who are interested in learning more, that was, I think, interesting idea for a special issue. Systematic reviews, which is a broad category of different types of reviews, but very useful as well, can incorporate a number of different synthetic techniques. Qualitative synthesis, bibliometric reviews, and we've seen a ton of these just recently. This is, I think, a really interesting technique where we look at things like authorship patterns, citation patterns, topic analysis. Paul Mayara, who I think I saw in the list of attendees, has done a bunch of different bibliometric reviews. I've posted a bibliography of bibliometric research on my website as well, because I've been sort of getting into that a little bit recently, and actually have a special issue coming out in that I've guest edited in Studies in Second Language Learning and Teaching. It's coming out in just a few months, so keep an eye out for that. Research agenda articles, and then state-of-the-art reviews, which are another type of secondary research, not necessarily synthetic in nature or systematic. So how do all these vary? Well, Sin Wang and I put into this article that we're working on right now, and that's under review, that should be out in the special issue that he mentioned. 4 different kind of broad categories or parameters on which to consider all these different types of secondary research. And then each of them kind of, and these are maybe viewed as like 4 different continua, as would be one way to look at it. That these different types of synthetic research can be evaluated on all these different continua, or not evaluated so much, but more like described. And so the first would be purpose. And so within purpose, they would be, most synthetic projects you could say fall on a continuum from more research focused to practice focused. And that's not really like a binary. There's certainly gray areas in between those. The structure can also be is also a feature on which these different types of reviews will vary. Some are very, very structured. Like a meta-analysis is essentially, and has the exact same structure or outline, discourse moves as a primary empirical study. You have an intro and lit review. You then have a method section, intro lit review, and in research questions. You have a method section, and the method section follows a very traditional outline of participants, in this case, study selection, study identification, with inclusion-exclusion criteria, just like we might do with a primary study where we recruit individual study participants. Then we talk about the data collection tool, right, parallel to the instrument section of a primary study. We talk about the coding, which is our data collection, and then we include a section on data analysis. Okay, that would be the exact same, and then results, and then discussion. So very, very highly standardized, structured for some types of reviews. Others are much more flexible. A state-of-the-art review might be organized, for example, by major constructs or by themes within that body of research. Okay, so these are going to vary on that dimension. They're going to review vary as well on the systematicity that's involved in the review process. Some types of secondary research, like traditional reviews, are not all that systematic in terms of how the studies are identified, how they're searched for, how how many data are collected from them. If that's done in a systematic way at all, it might just sort of be the sort of notes in the margin approach. Other types of secondary research, most notably things like methodological synthesis, meta-analysis, systematic review, are going to be much more systematic, involving systematic coding. And the way I like to do this, and I think most secondary researchers or systematic secondary researchers like to do this just in Excel or some sort of spreadsheet type software, where you have cases or studies in the columns, and then all the study features and findings in the rows. And then a final feature on which these different types of secondary or synthetic research will vary is sort of the way that the manuscript of the article, the report, is presented. and that can be done in a monomodal fashion or a multimodal fashion. This simply refers to whether or not we're using tables and figures and other types of visual representations of information and of data. Okay, and so the ones that tend to be more quantitative and more systematic tend to use a little bit more of data visualization techniques to present findings. I also wanted to go into, so I wanted to dive in a little bit more in depth into one particular kind of corner of this taxonomy, the meta-analytic kind of corner, because it's where most of my work comes from, and it's where actually the bulk of the secondary and synthetic research actually falls. And so I just want to say, talk for a few minutes about some of these sort of key concepts. And this is not, this is not tutorial. This is just really, we're really at the conceptual level here. But I just want to go through a little bit of some of these key concepts. And the first one, as I mentioned before, is that of effect sizes. And this gets us at what oftentimes we refer to as practical significance. And man, this is really, I think, at the absolute core of what we all care about. If you don't care, the effect size helps us understand the extent of the relationship or the effect that we care about. These are standardized indices, they are quantitative, and they express the strength of a relationship or an effect. Okay, and so common effect sizes, the two most common, is, as I mentioned before, Cohen's D. That's the same Cohen, by the way, of Cohen's kappa. If you guys are familiar with Cohen's kappa, very, very common. This expresses a standardized mean difference. So anytime we're comparing group means, and this is, it's obviously really, really common in designs in our field. Correlation coefficients, even though not everybody sees them as effect sizes, certainly are effect sizes. And then you have a bunch of other ones here, like percentage of variance explained, R squared and eta squared that we get from ANOVA models, and a bunch of others there. But the reason we want to bring these in from the meta-analytic perspective is that they allow us to compare and combine results across studies. Because imagine we all did a study on comparing the effectiveness of two different types of vocabulary interventions, and we all used different outcome measures, different post-tests. Well, we can't necessarily compare yours and mine because we're looking at different outcome measures. And so with these standardized indices, what they give us is they give us an index that they give us a value that we can then compare across studies, like, oh wow, well this one found a larger effect than that one, and we can also combine them via meta-analysis, which is essentially, just an averaging of those effect sizes, usually a weighted averaging, but a simple averaging. Effect sizes also help us move beyond this very, very limited and flawed notion of statistical significance. P-values are notoriously unreliable. They vary as a function of sample size. So any size difference between groups or any correlation between two variables will be statistically significant if we have a large enough sample. To me, that's, we might have the exact same mean difference in your study that looked at the effectiveness of these two different vocab treatments, and mine, the exact same difference between the groups. We could use the exact same outcome measure and everything, the exact same treatment, but if you had a slightly larger sample than mine, your difference might be statistically significant and mine might not be. To me, that's a huge problem. And the effect sizes are not as dependent on sample size. Yes, we're going to get a narrower confidence interval, so a more precise point estimate, as Hamish was talking about earlier. But it's not going to necessarily fall above or below than some kind of arbitrary cutoff or benchmark or threshold. Effect sizes are also much more informative than p-values. When we conduct a statistical test and we look at that p-value, we're essentially taking all that beautiful continuous variance, that spread of the data, and we're forcing it to fall on one side or the other of 0.05 or whatever threshold we're looking at. This is a horrible loss of data. Anytime we take continuous data and we chop it in half, we say this is X and this is Y, we're losing all that beautiful variance. The variance is the stuff. That's what we want, right? Effect sizes, by contrast, actually express. They keep our data in continuous form. They keep it, they actually express the magnitude, the size, the strength of the relationship in question. And man, isn't that what we really want to know? Like, are you satisfied as a researcher if you're using quantitative data and running quantitative analyses? Are you satisfied spending a year conducting a project all just to boil it all down to a simple yes, no? I'm not, and I don't think you are either, actually. And I actually, to take that one step further, again, I think that this kind of treatment of our data, where we convert the findings of all the work of a study into a simple yes, no, I think it's actually unethical. I think we're missing out on rich variance in our data. And I think that that's actually really, really inefficient. And so therefore unethical. I think, and Hamish was talking as well about efficiencies. I feel like when we act inefficiently by not using resources or time or energy or data appropriately, I think we're actually in that case actually acting unethically as well. And then finally, of course, to continue the final contrast here between p-values and effect sizes, everybody, when you took your first stats class, we all remember thinking, when we learned the 0.05 convention for statistical significance, alpha, remember asking ourselves, maybe asking our professor, well, why 0.05? Well, there really is no answer to that. It's simply convention. There's nothing magical about 0.05. And so we're relying on a inherently unreliable and uninformative and arbitrary convention. I think that's totally inappropriate, and it's done our field a huge disservice, and yet another reason to move towards almost exclusive attention and emphasis on effect sizes over p-values. These are just a couple examples, and these are like forest plots. Like Hamish showed us some really nice examples of forest plots before, and these are examples of effect sizes. Each of these, again, in this case, expressing the difference between groups that were allowed to. This is the difference in accuracy scores, I believe, from a recent meta-analysis of the effectiveness of collaborative writing. So each of these effect sizes, represented by the middle triangle, represents the difference between the accuracy of the groups that were allowed to write collaboratively versus the ones that wrote independently. And we can see that in this case. In this case, further to the right means a larger advantage for the groups that wrote collaboratively. So we see that on the individual level, this study had was much more. This study showed that the participants were much more accurate when writing collaboratively versus individually. But we see, of course, that varies. We see that varies, and that the overall d-value, and the d-value again here being the standardized mean difference between the two groups, collaborative writers versus individual writers, overall d-value of close to 1, which is fairly large. In this case, this does, to give another example, this is giving, this is the correlations between elicited imitation tasks and other measures of proficiency. There's a meta-analysis that I was involved in, and each of these bars in the forest plot represents the correlation between those two measures. So essentially looking at criterion-related validity of elicited imitation tasks. And we see that at the bottom, as we usually see in the forest plot, an overall correlation of about 0.67. And what that does is that kind of gives us more, we can put more, we know how much to trust on average. We know how much to trust elicited imitation tasks as a kind of proxy or shortcut for proficiency. Okay, but I just want to give you an idea of, a binary approach would say, oh, well, do we have a statistically significant correlation? As soon as I know that there's a statistically significant correlation, I want to know how much. Like almost every single one of these, like, so these 95% confidence intervals are showing also whether or not the correlation between the measures in each of these primary studies was statistically significant or not. But as soon as they're all statistically significant, except for this one up here. And so as soon as I know that, I want to know how much, and I think you do too. We all do. That's what we actually care about. That's what science is all about. It's about estimating the strength of and the magnitude of these things that we care about. Not simply knowing about the presence or absence of a relationship or an effect. So what this provides us is an actual estimate of the strength of that relationship. A natural question that you might ask is, I'm talking about these effect sizes like d-values and correlation coefficients. But and you may have like a really strong intuition for interpreting those indices, but maybe not. And so I think a reasonable question to ask is, what kind of effect sizes are actually typical in applied linguistics? And this is just a quick view to different meta-analytic findings in a couple different areas of the field. These are effect sizes from meta-analyses of instructed SLA in the realms of grammar instruction, vocabulary instruction, pragmatics instruction, and pronunciation instruction. And then, we're not going to sort of analyze these in depth, but each of these are meta-analytic correlations between different psychological variables or learner internal constructs or individual differences as correlated with L2 proficiency or achievement. So you can see these different variables, these individual differences or psychological variables that have been studied extensively in L2 research, and each of these represents the meta-analytic outcome of the correlation between each of those variables and L2 achievement or proficiency. So for example, Link et al. Found that the meta-analytic correlation between working memory and L2 achievement or proficiency was actually not that large. People really love working memory, and everybody includes working memory. Not everybody. A lot of people include working memory in their studies these days, and I'm not saying that that's not a great idea, but it's not. I don't think it's as a strong of an impact or role in second language development as some people might think. These are 3 recent meta-analyses, all looking at the relationship between anxiety and an L2 achievement or proficiency. We see fairly strong consistency across those meta-analytic outcomes. To help interpret also these different effect sizes, a close friend and collaborator of mine, Fred Oswald, and I, a number of years ago, looked at a whole bunch of primary studies and meta-analyses, and we proposed a kind of starting point for interpreting d-values and correlation coefficients. This is just based on the distribution that we saw of d-values and correlations. And we found that based on 346 primary L2 studies and 91 meta-analyses that were available at the time, looking at over 600,000 individual participants, that the 50th percentile for d-values of around 0.7, we said that, well, that's kind of medium-ish. And when we're looking at within groups contrast, like a pre to post contrast, we have to use a different kind of benchmark there. Medium-ish for correlation coefficients tends to be around 0.4. And then you can see here what we'd say generally is small or large-ish, and we label those at the 25th and 75th percentile. These kind of benchmarks, I think they're useful in some way, but I have to caution that it's really just a starting point. This isn't the way that you interpret your results. It may be a tool that you use, but there are lots of other ways to do that. And I encourage you to check out that paper. The whole second half of that article talks about additional approaches to interpreting effect sizes that go beyond simply benchmarks. Benchmarks are easy, but they're really kind of a shortcut, and they're not going to help you tell the whole story about your data. We did this as well with R-squared values in looking at a body of 495 regression models, and we found that the median regression model produced an R-squared value of 0.32, and you can see here the 25th and 75th percentiles respectively. And so this is, again, just kind of a starting point in interpreting different types of effect sizes. One more, this one is still in preparation. I'm working on this right now, looking at eta squared values. And this is a distribution looking at over 1,000 ANOVAs and the eta squared values that resulted from those models. And you can see here the various benchmarks that you might use to help interpret how much variance you're explaining from an ANOVA. And yeah, I just want to point out that Cohen himself did propose some benchmarks way back when, but these are certainly, as you can see here empirically, not at all appropriate for applied linguistics or L2 research. He said an eta squared value of 0.1 would be roughly small, 0.6 being sort of medium, and 0.14 is being large. We can see that those clearly do not apply in applied linguistics or L2 research. So I caution against using these. I'm not saying that these are necessarily right but these are certainly not right based on this data. A second key concept is that of choices and subjectivity. You know, we talk about synthetic research as being more objective, and it is, but there's also a ton of decision making and choices that enter into the process that can influence the study outcomes. You know, one concern I have is that I've been seeing in a lot of the meta-analytic literature that I read or that I review for different journals is a lot of kind of cookie cutter meta-analysis where people bring together 25 studies, they get a couple of research assistants, they code the data, and voila, you get a plate of cookies or a meta-analytic d-value. I think this is certainly not the approach that we want to be taking. I've seen this people not taking very, very thoughtful approaches to the methods that they use, or even the inclusion of the moderator variables that they use, things like that. And so I just want to emphasize that, yes, there's great objectivity here, which is a huge advantage, but there's also a lot of subjectivity as well and judgment calls that are made on the part of the researcher. And I don't think it's healthy for us to try to remove that expertise of the reviewer. The four major, I'm not going to talk about these, but these are the four major, sometimes people put them in, call it 5 or 6 or 8 different stages. It sort of doesn't really matter. But the idea I just want to get across is throughout the meta-analytic process, there's judgment, there's decision-making, there's subjectivity that comes into play. And these decisions that the synthesists make as they carry out the synthetic research project, all of which can and certainly do influence study outcomes. Just to illustrate that, each of these bars represents a meta-analytic outcome of the effectiveness of CAL, computer-assisted language learning research. And we see that they vary really, really widely. Well, why is that? Because they're all asking the general question of how effective is CAL for second language learning, but they're asking because of the different decisions they made along the way, everything from domain definition to study selection to different analytical techniques that they used. They're making decisions along the way that greatly influence the outcomes of the studies. Even each of these 6 articles, meta-analyses, is trying to look at the effectiveness of CAL glosses, yet look at the difference in outcomes that they produced. Okay, so certainly there's decisions that have been made along the way, and I'm not here to say that the decisions of any of these individual papers were inappropriate, because I can't evaluate that right now. But although we may see that from Hamish's paper, but they just are making different decisions. A third key concept is that of synthetic mindedness, and I was sort of referring to this before, and I want to mention and emphasize that, as I was saying before, this has sort of changed the way that my view on all research. This is not just relevant for secondary researchers. The synthetic mindset is the idea that no single study will produce a conclusive answer to any question worth asking. I'll say that again. No single study can produce a conclusive answer to any question that's worth asking. We tend to, just researchers, tend to put overemphasis on each individual study that we read or that we conduct ourselves, because we think it's a high validity. We believe in our research as producing high validity evidence. But I think we have to humble ourselves a little bit and remind ourselves that this is just one sort of pebble on the mound of producing knowledge of this particular topic or research question. Schmidt, 1992, the way he put it was, meta-analysis represents major changes in the way psychologists or linguists or educators view the general research process. And this plays itself out in lots of different kind of dimensions or areas of the field. We've seen this in terms of pushing for the connection between synthetic thinking and replication research, because both of these have in common this idea that no single study will conclusively answer the questions that we both need to know, that we all need to know about. Replication research provides us with greater generalizability. We run a study, we find out the results, and we can examine the extent to which those results replicate or are generalizable to other learners, other linguistic structures, other research settings, things like that. The synthetic movement has also led to greater interest in practical significance and effect sizes, helping us move away from that restrained view of binary thinking and what the presence or absence of a particular effect. The synthetic movement has also brought us to conduct lots of different methodological syntheses, improvements in data reporting, because we're thinking beyond our individual study. We're thinking, how is this study going to contribute to a research synthesis or meta-analysis? And so we have to be more transparent in the ways that we report our methods as well as our study outcomes. Excuse me. We've seen the synthetic movement also encouraging greater open science practices, transparency, availability of data, availability of instruments like on the IRIS database, pre-registration, which Hamish was talking about, protocols and code for analyzing data also being more available. Quick plug for the open scholarship SIG that Sin Wang is also running, and or the research network, and of course meta-analysis being part of the synthetic movement. And I just want to encourage you all to think about for a minute, what does this, if we embrace this synthetic ethic, what does this mean for us as primary authors in the ways that we design studies, in the ways that we choose topics? Are we acting as little islands in search of continents, or are we actually viewing, even at the design stage, how a particular study is going to contribute to a larger body of empirical knowledge? This matters in terms of the ways that we write up our lit reviews, the ways that we analyze our data, the ways that we report our data. We need to be more aware of more thorough and transparent reporting and interpreting results, not simply interpreting them in terms of maybe a single study, but putting them in the context of a broader domain of knowledge, contextualizing them in the context of a recent meta-analysis. So lots of different ways that the synthetic ethic plays out for primary authors. Of course, this is also relevant for editors and reviewers who are in the position to maybe influence primary researchers to situate their research more in a broader synthetic framework. Also relevant to teacher trainers, researcher trainers, and practitioners, in that what we get, as I was saying before, we get from the synthetic point of view, we get a kind of, in a way, a shortcut. It could be viewed as kind of an efficiency strategy. But also, I find that when I teach SLA, for example, and of course this is my bias as a synthesist, and I find this evidence to be very powerful, but that it can be very, very useful to kind of give that bird's eye view. When you teach graduate level courses, we don't we all know we don't have that much time, and so I like to oftentimes assign a synthetic or meta-analytic article as well as a primary study, something like that, some sort of combination to see kind of both types of perspectives. This is really a matter of, in some ways, efficiency as well. Okay, and then okay. So finally, I'm going to close up. I think I'm almost out of time here. I'm going to close up with just a few next steps. So we've talked about different types of synthetic research in the field. We've talked about some of the advantages and the key concepts and the ideas that we get from the synthetic approach. But I want to talk about next steps for us to move us forward. Like Hamish showed us, this dramatic expansion of synthetic research in the field, and I showed a little bit of that here too. But I think that we still have room for growth. We still certainly have room for improvement, and that was also borne out really clearly in Hamish's data from Chalmers et al. Forthcoming, that we need to improve. We also have plenty of room to expand it in new techniques. So I wanted to mention a few of those techniques right now in closing. One, I think that we have room to expand and improve on our use of data visualization in synthetic research. I'm not going to say a lot about that or about any of these. We need to think much more about publication bias. We have and we could be coming up with more ways of analyzing publication bias. There's a rich literature on publication bias where we suppress non-significant results or results that don't necessarily conform to expected findings. We need to look more and analyze that. We also need to try to move away from the idea that results that are not statistically significant are not interesting, because they're in many cases more interesting because they go against what we expect to find based on the previous literature or theoretical models. We definitely can consider, and I hope we will consider, examining empirically study quality at both the primary and the secondary level. So the Chalmers et al. Paper that we were seeing the results of just now, great example of that. I've done some work on that in a few different areas. We can be looking at other weighting techniques. I mentioned that meta-analyses produce weighted averages. We can probably expand there a little bit further. Other techniques. We've seen a couple examples of multi-level meta-analysis. Of course, multi-level modeling has become very popular in the primary quantitative applied linguistics literature, but we can also apply those multi-level models at the meta-analytic level. I'd love to see more open science practices, as Hamish was talking about, protocol registration, availability of coding schemes, data, even people providing their raw meta-analytic data, which can then be updated along the way. Like, remember that meta-analysis that Hamish showed that looked at the results over time? Imagine if as each primary study was produced, that data were available for like automatic meta-analysis. And so each primary researcher, this would involve like some real collaboration and coordination across research teams and labs. But imagine if everybody uploaded their data, the data went into kind of like this would not be programmatically very difficult to do, computationally difficult, but the data go in, and each individual study as it's carried out, the data are available. The meta-analysis is almost populated automatically. It'd be really, really powerful. And so that's something that we could do, and that in a way would, once we as a field got to the point where we felt like we had a stable overall meta-analytic outcome and in a relatively narrow confidence interval, we'd be more comfortable then saying, okay, well, I think we can move on from this topic or this area. Additional adjustments, corrections for attenuation at the meta-analytic level. Attenuation is when we have diminished effects based on measurement error or other statistical or psychometric artifacts like range restriction. We've done a little bit of that. I think we're going to see a lot more use of meta-regression. So when you have multiple, we often look at lots and lots of moderator variables in meta-analysis. Those moderator variables are sometimes associated with each other, but we're looking at them independently oftentimes. And so we could be looking at meta-regression. We can also, the next natural expansion beyond meta-regression would be meta-SEM or meta-structure equation modeling. Me and a few colleagues have a paper just out in Research Methods in Applied Linguistics, looking at introducing meta-analytic structure equation modeling. I think we'll also tend to see more Bayesian meta-analysis coming out soon. I would like to see that. I would like to see more reliability generalization meta-analysis, again, to reflect on our instrumentation that we use and the reliability of the instruments that we use. Meta-analytic replication, there's been a couple papers on that fairly recently. Frank Boers had a wonderful paper out in Studies in Second Language Acquisition just last year on meta-analytic replication. I talked about that in Graham Port's volume in 2012 chapter. I'd like to see increased availability of training and workshops on research synthesis and meta-analysis, and on reviewing. Jim McKinley asked, something about right after Hamish's talk about what journal editors can do. Well, part of the problem is that we don't have necessarily a reviewer base always that is skilled at reviewing. So we see a lot of papers getting rejected, but we also see sometimes papers that probably shouldn't be accepted actually getting accepted because the reviewer base doesn't necessarily know how to review these papers. So that's something else that we can do. And those are a couple of things that this SIG might be able to take on, is more training and workshops, and also maybe some things related to editing and reviewing. I think that'd be really useful. Sin Wang is also a very experienced journal editor, so I think he would be well positioned to lead there. It'd be really nice to see some field-specific guidelines, like maybe a checklist, like Hamish was saying. The Prisma guidelines are incredibly useful, may not be 100% applicable to our field, so maybe we want to reconsider that a little bit. And then finally, I'd like to see more consideration of the quality and the impact, both of those are separate things, of applied linguistics meta-analysis. And we've seen a few things, a few papers coming out looking at that. That Frank Boers paper I mentioned, Nessa Saleh, the Chalmers et al. Forthcoming, examining the quality of our research. This is a PhD student, Yuhong Hu, whose dissertation right now is working on developing specifically an instrument for assessing quality of meta-analyses in applied linguistics. And then Plonsky and Ziegler re-looked at the quality specifically of call meta-analyses. But I think that more of this kind of meta-research, examining the ways that we do this, can help. Same thing as we've done with the primary research, help then spur on improved methodological practices in future synthetic research. I know that's a lot. These are all possible SIG activities. So I'm not trying to set the SIG agenda here, but I just a few ideas that come to mind as I was thinking about this. I will stop there, I believe. So thank you so much. Really appreciate this again, the invitation and all your time and attention. And that's it.
Thank you very much, Luke. I really enjoyed the presentation. I think you demonstrate how think synthetically, I think in your presentation, giving a bird's eye view towards, you know, on key issues on the topics. I think a lot to think about, and I especially like the last few slides where you talk about the future direction. I think a lot to unpack, you know, in terms of within the SIG and also in collaboration with journal editors, reviewers, you know, and other people as well. So I thank you very much, Luke, for your presentation. I think. Yeah, Jim has a question, I think.
Yeah, data visualization. Yeah, so really good question, Jim. That's a topic that's like on my list of things to learn more about. But just a couple that come to mind would be, you know, well, one couple things. I often see and I'm talking about meta-analysis here in particular, but I often see forest plots that don't include all the data that they could, and or that aren't. I'm very particular about seeing forest plots presented either from low to high or from high to low, because I find them to be kind of disorienting when they're just presented like in chronological order or in order of author last name. So I like to see better organization for forest plots. There's also a bunch of newish techniques for presenting funnel plots. Not really new, but ones that haven't really yet been applied in applied linguistics. And so I'd like to see forest plots being more informatively applied as a way to assess publication bias. Those are just a couple ideas.
Thank you. I wish we had more time because I'm sure a lot of people have a lot of questions, but I think it's good. It's a good sign because it's just the inaugural event. we have a lot more activities coming up, and I'm sure Luke will be willing to participate in some of those in the future, so we can have more in-depth discussion or maybe workshops on meta-analyses or related techniques. So thank you very much, Luke, again for your presentation, and Hamish as well. I think the two presentations really set the scene, and you know, to show the need for a SIG, and you know, raising people's attention toward to this topic. So I think thank you very much, everybody, for being here in the inaugural event. I'm very happy to see everybody. Stay tuned for future activities, and remember for SIG participants or SIG members, it's you have the opportunity to access not only the resources on BAAL's website, but also resources on our SIG website, which are free to everybody. So I look forward to seeing everybody in some of the future events. If you have any suggestions about events, or maybe you would like to organize some events, because it's such a diverse topic, as Luke said, different types of syntheses. I don't think one single researcher will be master of all those techniques. So if you know of a technique or you're interested in sharing, I will be really interested in hearing from you. So please keep in touch. So thank you very much, everybody, and I will see everybody hopefully in the next event. See ya.
Thanks so much, Singwon.
Thanks, Singwon. It was great.
Thank you.
Very,
Cheers.
very good.
Yeah.
Bye.
I'll see you.